Hi everyone, welcome to this edition of the BC Poly Hot Stove. I'm Jordan Bateman, Vice President Communications, Marketing, Membership Services, everything else at the mighty Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, joined as always by...
My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the, well, we like to call it the Mighty Orca, and I am live from the legislature in Victoria. Jordan, good morning.
Excellent. You are a stone's throw from all the action. Literally, you could throw a stone and hit Daryl Plecas.
That's true. It's fun, funny you should bring him up. We're breaking the format sheet. Happening right now, literally as we speak, there's a meeting in the deputy clerk's office, Kate Ryan Lloyd, who ironically is in the job because Craig James, the clerk of the legislature, has been suspended. Such is the interest for next week's meeting of the Legislative Management Committee, literally a week from exactly this moment, that they are bringing in the press gallery, those who want to film it, which is why I'm not there, because I don't need a camera. But they've never dealt with this kind of interest before, so they're trying to figure out just how many cameras they can squeeze into the committee room for a week from today.
Wow. So let's just start this. So is Plecas actually going to deliver the goods here on January 21st? Like, I assumed he was just kind of blowing smoke. Is he really going to tell us what's gone on?
You know, as far as I know, no one has spoken to him. I have seen him a number of times, and we've said, hello and good morning, that kind of thing. But to the best of my knowledge, he has not hinted to anyone what he is going to say or not say a week from today. Now, just if you're watching or listening, last month at the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, LAMC, he said that on the next meeting, which is on January 21st, he would share some details as to the RCMP special investigation into Craig James and Gary and the results would make us, and I quote, vomit. And if they don't, he would resign. Hence the crush of interest for next week's meeting. But to answer your question is, nobody knows. There is, I would just be guessing. I suspect he will, if it's to do with the RCMP investigation, one has to wonder what about now is different than last month in terms of sharing details from an investigation. If it's details from his own investigation, then, again, wild speculation at best.
Yeah. Maclean, should I get on a ferry, come across for this meeting, not go in the meeting, but stand outside the meeting and hand every person who walks in a barf bag? Would that be too cute?
It would be a little on the cute side, and it's not the media that he's trying to make vomit. It's everyone in British Columbia, everyone who pays taxes.
But if he can't make Shannon Waters vomit, how is he going to make me puke?
That's true. We will see. There hasn't been this much of a wild card in BC or any or Canadian politics in a long time. I would believe just about anything. The only thing that's not going to happen on Monday is he's not going to resign. I cannot see that happening, if only because the NDP would have a weekend at Bernie's moment where they literally stuff him and prop him up in the chair because they need him for the math. But other than that, my God, he could come up with a Chinese conspiracy, probably entirely made up, or he could come up with the most mundane accounting error that somehow slipped through a ring of auditors general. I just don't know.
Oh man, okay. This is going to be something. Plecas following in the footsteps of wild cards like Bill Vander Zalm, Rafe Mayer, Amour de Cosmos. That is a who's who of crazy politics. Anyways, it'll be something. I'm honestly thinking I should call Emil Scheffel and get him to print up barf bags. The problem is if you get too cute, and what happens if he actually does have something?
Well, that's it.
There
are two RCMP special prosecutors. He didn't make that up. That's happening. Yeah. So we're joking. And the likelihood is it's probably nothing. But
don't you have to? If the Speaker of the House asks for a special prosecutor, don't you have to give him a special prosecutor?
Well, I would say so. Yes. We have nothing to compare this to. Is the problem, right?
True.
Like that's part. I don't know. I suspect the RCMP didn't know either. But you're right. If the Speaker of the House calls you and says, "I need help with a major investigation. I've been doing it for 8 months," yeah. The responsible thing is to say, "Yes, of course. How can we help?"
Yeah. Well, this is gonna be something. I can't wait. 21st, 1 week from today. Oh my God! Get your popcorn ready. Are they going to broadcast it live? I wonder if...
oh, yeah. It'll be streamed live on the legislature's website, and I encourage you all to listen. I, of course, will be going in person for all this stuff that you won't see, which is, the look on Mike Farnworth's face and all that kind of thing. I think being in the room will give you a certain amount of color that you won't get live. That said, yes, it'll be live on the legislature's website.
Well, let's aim to do a hot stove right after the meeting.
I could not agree more.
Yeah, because this will be great. And for the love of Pete, make sure you sit near the garbage can in case Plecas delivers. I don't want you puking all over the beautiful legislature.
That's
Just
true.
Get it into the garbage can. You know Andrew McLeod will. I need you to do that too. All right. That is just a preamble of the fantastic conversation you get here at BC Poly Hot Stove. Let's see Unspun give you that. No way. Anyway.
That's true. Top that, Jody and George.
Yeah, come on. Unspun, by the way, fantastic new podcast by George Affleck and Jody Vance. Jody, who I listened to, I was cleaning the house. I'm listening to their first edition. I'm like, God, she's like so much smoother than I am. She's just such a pro. And the two of them, I think they have a really interesting dynamic that I think is going to make for some really good podcasting. So theorca.ca, go watch Unspun. You can download it on our iTunes feed as well. Just search for The Orca BC. Look at that. Plugging the other shows. Pretty good.
That's good.
All right. BC Poly Hot Stove on the front burner. Maclean, 1 week from today, Daryl Plecas will be on the front burner, but right now it is something else on Vancouver Island that is the front burner. What's the number one issue in BC politics?
Well, the number one issue, maybe in all of Canadian politics, is the mother of all by-elections, trademarked by the Orca, of course. Now, what's changed since we last spoke about it? Well, Andrew Weaver, the Green Party leader, has been very active on social media of late. He took to Twitter to lambaste the NDP's candidate, Sheila Malcolmson, saying that this was all about her having an opportunistic grab for power and that she was triggering another by-election because she is, of course, the MP for Nanaimo. She doesn't actually live in the provincial riding. She lives on Gabriola Island, which he is suggesting is an issue and may well be. He also, if you're on Facebook, I believe he might have just posted this morning. There's a lengthy sort of essay expanding on this on Weaver's Facebook page. He goes into reasons why BC Liberals won't and shouldn't win, and then reasons why the NDP won't and shouldn't win. It's very Andrew Weaver style. It's very verbose and let's say articulate, but also probably typed in haste, if you know what I'm saying.
He's not the kind of guy that, like pause and think twice before hitting post, is he? He just kind of blurts it out. God bless him. And then he has to deal with the consequences. If you're John Horgan, you must be like, with friends like these, do I really need enemies?
Well, it's funny. It's I think Von Palmer wrote over the weekend. He was reading some of the year-end pieces of with Andrew Weaver and him saying, I like John Horgan. I would go for beers with John Horgan, and we've become friends. But I think with all of the hits the Greens have taken, they had to give way on LNG. They had to give way on Site C. They didn't get proportional representation. He has to avoid looking like the junior varsity version of the NDP. They can't look like the junior team because at a certain point, if you're a Green supporter, what are you getting? Yeah. So, I mean, they can't just roll over in this by-election. They have to be in it to win it. And, they do have a credible candidate in Michelle Ney. Yep. So we'll see.
She's not from Gabriola Island.
No, she's Nanaimo royalty. Yeah. Her father, of course, was I think he was the mayor, but he was also a social credit MLA, yeah. And apparently, well, I know because Andrew Weaver's been posting this, half the town is named after him, after Frank Ney, elementary schools and a pile of streets and all that kind of thing. So the name, at least, is extremely well known.
Nanaimo, I believe, is what they're calling.
Yes.
No, it is interesting. Look, I didn't know much about Tony Harris other than the biography. I did watch Rick Clough's interview with him, also posted at theorca.ca. And my takeaway from watching Harris, who's the BC Liberal candidate, is he was incredibly earnest. He wasn't slick. He wasn't political. He was certainly supportive of the BC Liberals and Wilkinson, but he wasn't partisanly blind to some of the flaws of, the 16 years in power. My hunch is that earnestness will go a long way with the electorate there in Nanaimo. That there's an authenticity to why he wants to serve. Like, he had the compelling reason why he wants to serve. That his family, 6th generation Nanaimoites, again, not from Gabriola Island, like some people running in the race. Have given a lot to Nanaimo, have created jobs there, have businesses. Nanaimo's given them a lot, their faith, their trust. It seems like everyone on the island owns a pickup truck sold by one of the Harris family members. And he talked about wanting to give back, that his family public service is part of this, community contribution. And he wanted to make sure that there was a candidate in the race who didn't care so much about all the big provincial political issues, that come with this being, such a pivotal by-election, but actually cared about the Nanaimo issues. I found that kind of charming in a very, unpolitical, unspun, if you'll forgive me, sort of way.
Well, I agree completely, and I think one of the challenges the NDP and Green have is when a BC Liberal candidate or member or leader, for that matter, says, "Yeah, in fact, we did get a couple things wrong over the course of 16 years," and because it doesn't fit into their narrative of whether they're the arrogant BC Liberals. Even Weaver in his the Facebook post I mentioned said they still need to be in timeout because they haven't learned the lessons yet. Those are his words. So when a guy like Tony Harris steps up and says, I agree on the big points, but yeah, of course, there's a couple things that I would have done personally differently. But on the big points, I agree. That is a stance that is befuddling to the NDP and Greens at times, because they're the ones who have to answer for policy now.
Yeah, no, exactly. So we got two all-candidates meetings coming up. Looking forward to seeing that. And I hear through the grapevine that the Orca might be doing some polling in Nanaimo. So
exciting.
Watch for that as well. We'll see what the race is like. The last poll was done by Main Street. This was pre-Michelle Ney coming into the race, pre the Conservative and Libertarian and VIP, Vancouver Island Party candidates coming to the race. But it showed that basically Malcolmson and Harris within the margin of error. So it'd be very interesting to see where the numbers are at.
Well, and Weaver, again, not to give him too much press, but he said that he thinks that, is it Justin Greenwood, the Conservative candidate? He thinks he might get as much as 10% of the vote, which, wow.
I find that difficult to believe,
yes.
But Justin Greenwood, forget about Gabriel Island. He's from Langley. Now, Langley is the greatest place in British Columbia. I think I agree, would agree completely on that. Why someone would ever leave Langley to run anywhere else is shocking to me. But when you consider the fact that if you made a list of the 100 best-known Conservatives in Langley, I might be on that list, probably number 99. I can tell you Justin Greenwood would be a sure contender for number 101. Because no one in Langley has heard of Justin Greenwood in any of the Conservative camps that are there in that very conservative community. So Justin Greenwood, interesting choice here for sure. But who else do the Conservatives have? Clearly no one in Nanaimo wanted to step up and run for them. All right, my thing, what's on the front burner? I guess we got to talk pipelines. Mm-hmm. Well, first, some of the conduct of some of these NDP MLAs. You had a cabinet minister, Doug Donaldson, basically telling CBC on the weekend before this whole issue kind of came to national attention that he was there to offer his support to the hereditary elders. Very clear, I'm here to offer my support. Brought them food, sat down with them. Then the next day, everything kind of blew up a little bit. Literally, protesters poured gasoline on the ground and burnt down tents, according to eyewitness accounts given to Tom Fletcher of Black Press. And lo and behold, Doug Donaldson disappeared for a day and then resurfaced with a statement saying, no, support, what are you talking about? I support the rule of law, and I just happen to support John Horgan's position flawlessly. You got to love cabinet solidarity. So there's that piece. And then Jennifer Rice, the, I believe, North Island MLA,
North Coast.
North Coast, pardon me. I did not mean to besmirch the North Island. You would never elect such a human as this. No, she came out with some really questionable, speaking of Facebook comments around the importance of these hereditary elders, basically throwing John Horgan's position under the bus. That the elected folks, the elected band councils, have the right to give consent. And that hereditary eldership should be kind of weighed very carefully in the balance of this. She said no. She flew right in the face of that. Interesting times there in NDP land on this issue.
Oh man. Well, it's a minefield for them. I mean, when this story first broke and people were quite happy to go with the narrative that this was yet another example of a colonial government trampling on First Nations rights. And I mean, it only took 48 hours for the real story to emerge, which is that this is very complicated. And that if you find some First Nations people out, either in media or social media, Dallas Smith is one guy who came to mind who put it like, this is an internal issue for the Wet'suwet'en in terms of who speaks for Wet, whether it's the elected Bound Council or the hereditary chiefs. It's just, this is a matter for them. This appears to be an internal calling it a disagreement, which they have to sort out. And it's just sort of unfortunate that this is happening in real time, because LNG Canada really did go in there and negotiate a deal with the band council, and they did that in good faith. I mean, that happened. And now, if the hereditary chiefs are now saying they don't believe the elected council had jurisdiction, that's fine. That's something for them to sort out. This is not an example of the LNG Canada going in there and saying, "Too bad, we're building the pipeline."
And you're talking about, there's something like 120 hereditary chiefs in this particular First Nation, and 115 of them are on board with this apparently. So.
It's When we went to the briefing, the technical briefing that the province held for those of us in the media before the premier statement, the person from Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation said, we cannot describe to you with any certainty the decision-making structure currently in place within the Wet'suwet'en, because it's changing, it's in flux, it's not a criticism, nor can they tell us how many chiefs there are. There are those who say 14. There are those who say more than 100. I mean, when you've got that kind of disparity, it's clear that things are changing rapidly on the ground, and that's not LNG Canada's fault. It's not the provincial government's fault, and it's not even the Wet'suwet'en's fault. It's something that's happening in real time.
But Maclean, Susan Sarandon tells me that I'm evil for wanting this pipeline built. Come on.
Well, she did say that, yes. Susan Sarandon probably thought it was an oil pipeline. Even the premier, even John Horgan said that of the protests, there was a lot of them that were carrying signs saying things about dissolved bitumen, it's not an oil pipeline, holding up signs of orcas, which should have been an advertisement for our site, but no, they apparently thought this is near the ocean, and saying things like dismantle capitalism. In other words, the premier was saying what a lot of people on the other side are saying in these situations, which is that protesters may not have known exactly or cared the details of what they were protesting.
You can take the you can take the NDP out of activism, but you can't take the activism out of the NDP. Look, part of me is like, look, you dumb activists in the NDP, you're the ones who fostered this, kind of division between British Columbians. You're the ones who created it, who went out to the U.S.-funded, NGOs to get money for these causes. Congratulations, now you've reaped what you sowed.
Well, and you're quite right. I mean, they were only too happy to go to the Occupy protests and grandstand however many years ago that was, and every other protest that's happened since then, they're always on the side of right and righteous indignation. And funny how things get more complicated when you're in government.
Yeah, I loved the Occupy protest because the BC Teachers Federation, CUPE, BC Federation, they were all there with their anti-capitalism banners. And I did a story at the time for the Taxpayers Federation pointing out how much of their pension holdings were held by RBC and Scotiabank. And these guys were protesting the very thing that they had invested billions of dollars in. So hypocrisy, thy name is the NDP. Okay, backburner issues. Burnaby South by-election, February 25th. We finally have a date. I don't want to talk too much about Jagmeet Singh, because I know we're going to get to him later in the show. But yeah. Here we go, February 25th, mark your calendars. It's a by-election in Burnaby South.
Yeah, if you're there, vote. This is an important one. They're all important ones. This one, obviously, a backseat to what's happening in Nanaimo. But I mean, anytime you've got a federal leader for however long that lasts, because we are going to get to that later. But yeah, this is one worth watching. There are polls that have him as low as third.
I know. Look, it hilariously to me is this NDP liberal kind of myth that, Burnaby South, this is like the nexus of all the Trans Mountain Pipeline protesters, and they all hate it. Look, I've looked at the polling. The polling shows, almost 2/3 of British Columbians support the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Even in the Lower Mainland, it's close to 60% support. I don't believe Burnaby South, which, by the way, is a long way from the Kinder Morgan Terminal, which is in Burnaby North, really has that big a problem with this pipeline. I think that they've come around, like a lot of British Columbians have, to look. This is a good project and important for the national interest, and let's not downplay it. Like, British Columbians are Canadians too, and many of them are very proudly, fiercely Canadian, and want to see this go forward. So this is no slam dunk for the anti-pipeline folks. I don't think it's that big an issue in Burnaby South. I think rent evictions is a bigger issue, and I think housing affordability, those are much larger issues to them than Trans Mountain.
Could not agree more. The NDP wanted this to be a single issue by-election, and they wanted that single issue to be a lot more divisive than it really is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're 1 month away from something important. What's going on a month from now in the Ledge?
Oh, well, a month from now, we'll be hearing the speech from the throne, which is traditionally, well, first of all, it's the start of a new legislative session. And in it, it's delivered by the lieutenant governor, but it's not written by the lieutenant governor. It's written by someone in the premier's office. For a number of years, that was me. And it is sort of the marker where government lays down what they sort of intend to do. Now, there are different interpretations of what that means. Under Gordon Campbell, the throne speech was very long and very detailed and contained a lot of news. Christy Clark didn't want to do that. Christy Clark wanted it to be more general under the very reasonable assumption that why would you give news to the lieutenant governor when we can do it ourselves? And also it made for shorter speeches for me to write. I had no problem with that. We'll see what this one is. Right now, I can tell you that somebody in the Premier's office is feverishly working on this, trying to include everything and not cut it down, but also not have a 45-minute epic. They will be doing things like, it's amazing how much time goes into things like researching prominent British Columbians who have passed away since the last one, which is the kind of thing that gets mentioned off the top in 2 minutes, but consumes a fantastic amount of time because, I mean, obviously you don't want to forget anyone important. Then there's a political decision at where you draw the line of who's a prominent British Columbian and who's not. And then from there, making sure you pronounce the names right. So, I mean, a phenomenal amount of time and resources goes into this throne speech that unfortunately precious few people actually watch or read.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I guess right now what's happening is the House leader and whatnot are collecting all the pieces of legislation that they expect to go through the House this year, this session. And then that's sort of the starting point, I would imagine, for the throne speech, right? Like they sit down with all these different pieces of legislation and...
Yeah, very much. They'll outline again. They can do it in very specific ways where they say we're going to introduce this legislation, which is going to do this, this, and this. Or they can say, we believe in fairness and we'll continue to fight for fairness and et cetera and so forth. And that can mean just about anything. Now, the NDP have had a very ambitious approach to introducing legislation, so they probably do have a list. And from their point of view, they're probably very happy to have a very specific throne speech. Their previous ones were a lot more specific than those under Christy Clark. So yeah, that is probably exactly what's happening. Is somebody is compiling a list of everything they expect to introduce, and sort of trying to weave a narrative from there.
Interesting, very interesting. Now we should mention you did not write the clone speech.
I did not.
Yes,
no.
I feel like you would like that out
do.
there. I feel like you would like that out there. Just
you know what? I appreciate that. I had forgotten about that, but you're right. That is one I did not write.
That's right. How cheeky would it be if John Horgan just had the Lieutenant Governor reread the clone speech?
Well, it would be. I mean, I won't pretend I wouldn't laugh.
Epic politics. That would be epic politics.
It would be. Sure. Yes. I mean, it'd be worth it just to see what Andrew Weaver would do. I think his head might actually explode.
Yeah. Marco Rubio put out a tweet on this government on border security, and it was like a hardcore border thing. Like we need it. We can't allow criminals to come across our line. The border must be secured at all costs. We need a wall there. And everyone started ragging on him. All the Democrats jumped in and started kicking the crap out of him. And his next tweet was a response to his first one saying, pardon me, we need to issue a correction. I've plagiarized this tweet from Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and provided links to them saying that exact thing. That made me laugh.
Kind of genius, actually.
Yeah,
and the best part is he did wait and let it breathe and let the people get themselves worked up. That's exactly the kind of thing that a good research department will do for you.
Yeah, no, it was good stuff. All right, throne speech 1 month from today. We will watch for that. Next segment, who is heating up? Who are the politicians or leaders who are having good weeks? Who's in the cold? Who are not having good weeks? I'll give you my nominee for the hot list here. Federal Cabinet Minister Jane Philpott. She's been promoted from Indigenous Services Minister to Treasury Board President to replace Scott Bryson, who's retiring as an MP. And I gotta say, it's exciting. You're in charge of the Treasury Board. There's those spending decisions, priorities for the federal Liberal government. Do you think it's easy to make priorities, Mr. K? It's not. But she follows in the footsteps of some political legends. And I'm gonna read you 4 names. Tony Clement, Reg Alcock, Art Eggleton, and the immortal Don Mazinkowski, former Treasury Board presidents. maybe not a who's list of future party leaders. And in fact, I was kind of looking at this. Is Jane Philpott is turned out to be a very good retail politician. Did a lot in Indigenous services. Kind of interesting. She's been shunted to a more administrative role where she deals more with internal caucus issues than external, like Treasury Board. So I thought, how does this bode for future leadership potential? She gets mentioned often as a future leader of that party, as does Chrystia Freeland. Not good, not good. In fact, only one Treasury Board president has ever gone on to be Prime Minister, Joseph Jacques Jean Chrétien. It's a little.
I heard of that guy, I think. Yeah.
Little history for you there. And he did it for Pierre Trudeau back in the day, and then ended up decades later becoming Prime Minister of Canada. And I'm going to tell you, 95, 96 budget's pretty darn good Prime Minister as well.
Hey, he wasn't the worst guy to work for either, I can tell you that. And speaking of hot politicians, and also speaking of test driving test driving your gag reflex, and probably a lot of our watchers and listeners, I want you to hear me out for this hot politician. I'm going to say it's the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and I'm going to tell you why.
What?
Not necessarily because of policy, and not necessarily because of anything he's done recently, but I do think he deserves credit for these town hall things that he does across the country. They are enormously popular. There are lineups around the block wherever he goes, and he is extremely good at facing down the inevitable very angry criticism. Now, you might rightly say that he invites much of that angry criticism, and I won't disagree with you. What I will say is that that is something that stands out about him, and he comports himself well in them, and that other political leaders would do well to at least attempt something like that, because it's hard not to look good when you are staying calm when somebody is screaming at you. Even if you agree with the person doing the screaming, the one who is staying calm always looks good by comparison, and the Prime Minister's done that, and for that, I am giving him some credit.
Yeah, look, I think back to Christy Clark in 2013, where she resurrected the BC Liberals based on her ability for that retail politics, interacting with people. She's at the top of her game. She'd come off all those years as a talk show radio host. She'd gone through the BC Liberal leadership process. She was at the top of her she had incredible command. If she was a baseball pitcher, she had incredible command of her pitches during those things. Fast forward 4 years, her team, no offense Maclean, had put her in a bubble. Didn't let her interact with real people for 4 years. And, she came out in 2017 and I Am Linda burst onto the scene, and she was rusty. She looked like someone who didn't, know how to handle that kind of pressure, which, if you told 2013 election watchers, they would have been shocked to see how quickly that deteriorated. So one of the great mistakes that, the Liberals made during Christie's run was that they did not get her out into groups of people. Have her spend 20 minutes walking outside of the legislature, meeting people, just chatting with normal humans, away from the glare of the lights, letting her connect with British Columbians and tourists. And it's a shame that that didn't happen. But yeah, Justin Trudeau, to his credit, he's done these between elections. I think it bodes well for him when he heads into the next election cycle.
Well, and to underscore your point you just made, that's exactly what we're talking about here. We're not talking about an endorsement for policy or anything like that. Quite the opposite. We're talking about the actual nuts and bolts of politics. And your point about Christy Clark is well taken. And I think that some of those lessons have been learned in the Prime Minister's office, that it's important for the Prime Minister to take some lumps here now and again in public, because A, it's going to make him better and more prepared for an election, but also B, it just looks good on him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, my cold politician is another federal one. Vancouver MP Jody Raybould-Wilson. Oh man, there was a lot of fanfare when she became the first Indigenous Attorney General, Minister of Justice in Canadian history. This was a big plum for her. Got her, I think, into the top 10 or top 15 of most influential people in the Vancouver Magazine list. And today, she was demoted unceremoniously to Veterans Affairs. I love veterans. Veterans are an incredibly important portfolio. We all say that, but this is a big drop in the cabinet hierarchy for her. Replaced in justice by a backbench Montreal MP named David Lametti. Jody Raybould-Wilson already in a tough fight for re-election in Vancouver. This is not going to help her get much further.
No, I mean, I don't know if you were anything like me. I had never heard of Mr. Lametti before. No disrespect to him, but today was my introduction to him. His name didn't even ring a bell.
Yeah.
But such is the nature of being a Quebec backbench MP when you're talking with people in British Columbia. So fair enough. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to portray this as anything other than a demotion. And I will confess I don't actually see the reason. I assume it has something to do with election posturing, and maybe Mr. Lametti is in a seat that desperately needs some bolstering, so saying that he's a cabinet minister, well, it won't hurt his re-election chances, so we'll see. One wonders if the Liberals are really worried about BC if they're demoting their, I would argue, their star cabinet minister, or would have been perceived as their star cabinet minister. No disrespect to Jonathan Wilkinson or anyone like that, but Judy certainly had a higher profile. So again, I don't really know what's going on there.
Except you just called her Judy instead of Jody. Jody, but look, listen.
You're right.
I'll tell you why she was demoted, and it's incompetency. The Attorney General's file did not progress well. Cannabis has not progressed well for the Trudeau government. They've been slow on reappointing judges. There's been a number of these issues that have kind of spooled out under her that have gone nowhere. Election promises that have gone nowhere. And I think Justin Trudeau realized that he needed someone in that position who could get the job done, and I don't think he felt that Jody Raybould Wilson was doing it. So I'll say it.
Well,
I don't think she was very good.
Well, that's fair enough. I'm not even arguing with you. I'm just thinking it's tough to do that 8 months before an election, where you might have some chance for this to sort of fizzle out if this was a year ago. But now she'll be wearing that come election time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Of course, she's nowhere near as cold as your nominee.
Well, I mean, it almost feels like piling on at this point, doesn't it? I feel guilty saying this, but and when, for being honest with ourselves, there isn't a colder politician anywhere in North America than Jagmeet Singh. He is just, he's having a miserable, we mentioned he's polling credibly, some polls have him third in the by-election in Burnaby South. My hands
here, he's so cold. Just talking about him sends shivers down my spine.
And then even when he's given a comparative softball, for example, when the government of China accused Canada of being white supremacist, his response on live TV was to say, who accused who of white supremacy? I mean, when a foreign power insults the entire country and government on that level, the response is, well, first of all, to know that it happened. But second of all, to come to a defense of the country. I mean, it's just...
I know.
There's a certain amount of literally entry level politics 101 stuff that Mr. Singh just doesn't seem to have for whatever reason. All those ads that the Conservatives ran about Justin Trudeau being just not ready, unfortunately, they seem to be much more applicable to Jagmeet Singh, whatever his other talents. But I mean, he is not thriving in his moment of the spotlight.
No, I read somewhere what do you think Tom Mulcair is thinking watching this Gong Show unfold? I mean, he just must shake his head at this nonsense.
Well, he has said publicly that, I mean, if this is it for Jagmeet, if he doesn't win in Burnaby South, he's got to resign. And I think Mulcair is right.
The problem is there's no other NDP MPs left. They're all jumping ship.
No, yeah. There's Nathan Cullen. There's
Nathan Cullen, now I have to stop and think. Nathan Cullen just looks like a fool on this LNG Canada pipeline, criticizing Trudeau and giving Horgan a pass on what's actually a provincial project.
That's exactly right. He's chosen sides, but not in a way that makes any consistent sense. But I'm just trying to think of an NDP MP that comes to mind, and there are precious few. I mean, there's a reason the NDP
Nikki
are polling
Ashton,
federally something like, is it 15% or something like that?
It's terrible.
I mean, it's literally it's at the sort of they're lower federally than the Green Party are provincially, which is to say that they're a long way behind the other two parties.
Yeah, Jagmeet Singh, it's all or nothing for you in February 25th. I think he knows it, but...
I think so.
6 weeks away, and you're right. There is no colder politician anywhere in the Western Hemisphere than Mr. Jagmeet Singh. I
felt that this, not to give people too much of a glimpse behind the scenes, but we do talk about this via email before we go. And I started typing it, and then I actually stopped and said, no, it's just piling on. But we're being honest. He's ice cold. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, he is Elsa and Anna cold. He is Iceman X-Men cold. He is Mr. Freeze cold. That's how cold Jagmeet Singh is. All right, the Orca BC, or at the Orca BC on Twitter, Facebook.com/the Orca BC, If you want to see our YouTube channel, bit.ly/theorcatv. There you go. And of course, theorca.ca. Maclean and I both have articles coming this week. I'm still working on my idea, he said nervously to his editor-in-chief, wondering what he thinks. I swear, I'll get it to you. I swear. Just give me another couple minutes.
There's going to be. We've had some great pieces in the last couple of days, and we mentioned the debut of Unspun, but we also had another great history piece on Saturday. Rosalind Kunin on an actual idea for the Lower Mainland municipalities to raise money rather than uselessly trying to hold up resource companies. And we've got some more pieces from the likes of Daniel Fontaine and Paul DeYoung today. So yeah, there's always lots of great new content on theorca.ca.
Right. If you're relying on Maclean and I to provide the great content, you are sorely mistaken. Go to theorca.ca. You'll see what we mean. I love the history pieces. You know, I gotta say,
I do
Daniel
too.
Marshall and fantastic writer. I find him very engaging. I learn something every time I read his piece. It's become like a Saturday morning ritual for me. I sit down with my cup of coffee and open my phone and read the latest Daniel Marshall history. It's brilliant.
That's great. And this latest piece is actually from a historian in Iowa named Stephen Branting about a piece of Iowa history that takes place in BC, and it's just an absolutely fascinating read. It's a ripping ripping good yarn, as they say in the UK.
Perfect. All right, we'll be back next week after the committee meeting. We'll post on Facebook exactly what time. We expect that all to wrap. I will have my barf bag ready because no doubt I will have thrown up many times. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. All the shows, Rick Clough, Unspun, BC Poly Hot Stove. Just search for the Orca BC in your iTunes or other podcast store. Have a good one.